we had on the 18th, we had the D01, the infamous D01 account dump like it was like 150 million hex over the last like few times it dumped, and it did an artificial pump up to like think people to go long, and then they came back in and just wicked the price down, and then it was immediately bought back up. And so I've seen like the buy to sell ratio on the right over here get anywhere from like 3 to 1 to 4 to 1 to even one day I saw it was like 5 to 1. There was like 700 and some buys to like 220 sells or something. So this to me is showing me that there's more and more people interested in accumulating and buying hex. They're starting to see the real long-term value proposition. A lot of like what the founder of Hex has said has come true over the last 2 years. And the price is still up. I think it's like 25,000% or something. We'll go look at that in a minute. But and on top of that, you think about when you zoom out on the daily on Hex, you think about like what's been going on for the last 485 plus days. It's basically just been a massive downtrend, but you got to think about what all went into this. In the early days of Hex, pull up this chart. In the early days of Hex, there was just Hex, and it was the true DeFi product. Like everything else, it didn't exist. There was no icosahedron. There was no Pulse Doge ecosystem. There was no Maximus ecosystem. There was no Pulse chain. There was no idea of a Pulse chain ever even existing, really. Besides maybe one time Richard mentioned that if gas fees ever got out of control, he'd make an L1, which at the time seemed absolutely absurd. And so none of that existed for this 10,000x until the very end when we went from basically 7 cents all the way up to 56 cents. That's what created that rally. If you really think of it from that perspective, anything over like that $7 level, I mean, I'm going to go ahead here now and delete out these fib levels because we don't need them right now. And I'll make this line kind of big so you can see it. But any price over that is really just, it was all fundamental. It was based on a pulse chain, the idea that this pulse chain thing was going to exist. We may very well have just topped at that, 7, 8, 9 cent region and never broke 10 cents if we didn't have those things. So when you think about it from that perspective and you measure the drawdown, you're really down 73% off that level at these prices. I mean, I'm not trying to take away the fact that we're actually hit a low of like 96% down. That's bullish because when you look at the original chart from the original low here, you measure down off the all-time high or the very launch price all the way down to the bottom, it went down like 98, 99% and still went on to recover to, all-time highs and much further beyond in the following two years. It was like 1.7 years. It did the 10,000x, I think. Let's see, off the low, it was 612 days. So pretty insane, And so to think that when the liquidity is at the same values it's at now as it was back then, when we did these huge run-ups, it's going to take the same amount of economic energy to accomplish the same goal. And this time, yeah, there might be a few more sellers than there were back here, but again, maybe not, because we've really only added 53% more stakers, and so that's all locked up anyway. So like, how many of them are going to sell and at what price points, And so the way I think of that is like projecting price outwardly. If I zoom down here, it doesn't take much to get us back over 10 cents, especially if you factor in like a pulse chain announcement or something. And it'll just bust right back. It's just in the same way that a few accounts was able to push the price down, a few accounts could push the price right back up on low liquidity. And so then, yeah, you could get right back above like, 10 cents and then trade between 10 and 25 cents for an entire year, fighting this midline of this giant upwards channel before finally like really kicking off the bull market and breaking the all-time high sometime into the end of 24 or into 25. So the price targets to the upside get into the many dollar price targets. I've mentioned them many times. And so just because I don't know for sure what speculative mania looks like in the next bull run, or, what extra money comes into the system due to Federal Reserve monetary policy and those types of things, like I can't predict how high it'll go, but I can tell you what the basic targets are. And so like if you go back to the HEX conference, we kind of said that, like $1.25 to $4 was like a meaningful level that would probably most likely be hit. And then if you want to just cut that in half, factoring a pulse chain launch, with a fork of pulse chain, maybe the valuations get cut in half. So whatever half of that would be. So those are kind of your targets, and those are many multiples above where we're at right now. So it's almost like the risk is to the upside on this stuff, and so just something to keep in mind. I don't know if you wanted to add anything in here or have me look at any particular charts before we get into the icosahedron stuff, or.
No, I think that was great, man. Awesome. Yeah, we can get into the icosahedron stuff on my website, and then from there we could probably do like the hedron charts and stuff as we talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Just the last thing before we pull down the screen and Sloth will pull up, look into hedron.com, is that the HEX chart is really testing this 485-day downtrend, and so even if you come down for a double bottom, like we're running out of time for as far as like what sell pressure can do. We saw 150 million dump, and then the price whipped right back up, and so it's time to start changing your sentiment. I mean, Bitcoin's showing it, ETH is showing it, and X is playing with this pink line more often and with more volume. So things to keep in mind.
Yep. Hell yeah, man. It's definitely been a blessing to be able to accumulate HEX down at the 2 cent level pretty consistently with all the upside that's present.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The other